Royal Guard Edmund Whitmore had maintained perfect composure through 10 years of palace service, enduring every provocation with unwavering dignity. But when a wealthy tourist struck him across the face in front of hundreds of witnesses, drawing blood with her diamond rings, everyone expected his military training to fail him. What he did next didn't just shock the woman who attacked him, it sparked a global conversation about true strength and the power of grace under fire. Hit that subscribe button, because this response will redefine everything you thought you knew about courage. The August morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of Buckingham Palace as thousands of tourists gathered for the daily spectacle of the changing of the guard ceremony. Among the sea of excited faces and raised cameras stood Guard Edmund Whitmore, a figure of absolute stillness in his scarlet tunic and towering bearskin hat. At 34, Whitmore embodied a decade of flawless service to the crown, his military record unmarred by a single disciplinary note. The son of a Yorkshire schoolteacher, he had joined the army at 19 and served 2 grueling tours in Afghanistan before earning his position among the elite Queen's Guard. His morning had begun at 4:30, as it did every duty day, with the meticulous preparation that transformed an ordinary man into a living symbol of British military tradition. Each button on his scarlet tunic had been polished to mirror brightness, every strap and buckle aligned with geometric precision. The white gloves he wore represented more than ceremony. They symbolized the purity of service, the commitment to protect with hands that remained clean of personal agenda or ego. Whitmore took profound pride in this symbolism, viewing his role not as mere pageantry, but as a sacred trust, connecting him to generations of guardsmen who had stood in identical positions, facing their own tests of character and resolve. The crowd that morning was particularly dense, swollen by the peak tourist season that brought visitors from every corner of the globe to witness British royal tradition. Most approached the ceremony with genuine respect and wonder, their cameras clicking to preserve memories of a culture steeped in history. But among the respectful majority moved a smaller group whose expensive clothing and imperious bearing marked them as members of an exclusive luxury tour, the kind that promised VIP access and unforgettable experiences to those willing to pay premium prices for the illusion of special treatment. Victoria Ashford Kent emerged from a chauffeur-driven Rolls-Royce at precisely 9:15, her Chanel suit and Cartier jewelry announcing her wealth before she spoke a single word. At 47, she had spent 2 decades married to a British banking executive whose family name opened doors throughout London's elite circles. Her life had been a carefully curated collection of first-class flights, 5-star hotels, and the kind of service that materialized at the slightest gesture. The divorce papers filed 6 months earlier had shattered this carefully constructed world, though she maintained the facade with grim determination, as if continuing to play the role might somehow make it real again. Her tour guide, a young woman named Sophie, who had learned to recognize trouble in wealthy clients, noticed the telltale signs immediately: the 3rd mimosa consumed before 10 in the morning, the sharp tone used with the driver, the way Ashford Kent's eyes scanned everyone around her with barely concealed contempt. Sophie had seen it before in clients going through personal crisis, the way pain transformed into aggression toward anyone perceived as beneath them. The service workers of the world became safe targets for rage that couldn't be directed at its true source. As Ashford Kent approached the palace gates with her group, she immediately began making demands that revealed both her sense of entitlement and her fundamental misunderstanding of how royal protocol functioned. She wanted to stand closer than the designated tourist areas, to touch the guards' uniforms for photographs, to have the ceremony's timing adjusted to accommodate her schedule. Each request was declined politely but firmly by palace staff, and with each refusal, her indignation grew more pronounced. The expensive champagne brunch had lowered her inhibitions, while amplifying her sense of grievance. About life's recent disappointments, Whitmore observed this escalating tension with the trained awareness that came from years of reading crowd dynamics in both combat zones and ceremonial settings. He recognized the dangerous combination of alcohol, entitlement, and poorly managed pain that Ashford Kent represented. His military experience had taught him that the most dangerous situations often began not with obvious threats, but with emotional instability seeking an outlet. Yet protocol demanded he remain at his post, maintaining the perfect stillness that was his primary duty, trusting that palace security would manage any actual disturbances. The confrontation began when Ashford Kent, frustrated by her inability to secure special treatment and emboldened by her companion's encouragement, decided to test whether the guards were truly as unmovable as legend suggested. She positioned herself directly in front of Whitmore, her expensive perfume mixing with the scent of alcohol as she invaded his personal space with deliberate provocation. Her voice, loud enough to attract attention from surrounding tourists, dripped with contempt as she addressed him not as a person, but as an object. A curiosity to be poked and prodded for her entertainment. Do you actually do anything useful, or are you just an expensive statue? She demanded, her words slightly slurred. I pay taxes that fund this ridiculous circus, and I can't even get a decent photograph because you're blocking the view. The accusation was absurd. She was American and paid no British taxes, but logic had long since abandoned her thinking. She was operating purely on emotion now, her pain seeking any available target. And this silent guard represented everything she couldn't control in her crumbling life. Whitmore maintained his position with the discipline that defined his service, his eyes fixed on a point in the distance, his expression revealing nothing of the calculations occurring behind his trained facade. He had endured far worse provocations during his decade of service: drunken tourists, aggressive photographers, even occasional physical contact from people testing the limits of what guards would tolerate. His training emphasized that maintaining dignity under provocation was the essence of his role, that the uniform he wore represented something larger than personal pride or ego, but what happened next would test not just his training, but the very foundation of his character and beliefs about human nature. The assault occurred so suddenly that the surrounding crowd barely registered what was happening until it was over. Ashford Kent, her face flushed with alcohol and rage at being ignored, drew back her right hand and struck Whitmore across the face with all the force her fury could muster. The sharp crack of flesh meeting flesh echoed across the courtyard like a gunshot, silencing nearby conversations and causing hundreds of heads to turn toward the source of the disturbance. Her diamond rings, worth more than most people earned in a year, opened small cuts along Whitmore's cheekbone, and bright red blood began to trickle down his face, staining the pristine white collar of his uniform. The collective gasp from the crowd created a vacuum of sound that seemed to suspend time itself. Cameras that had been casually recording the ceremony suddenly focused with laser intensity on the unfolding drama. Ashford Kent's companions stood frozen in horror, their earlier encouragement of her behavior evaporating as they realized they had just witnessed a criminal assault captured by dozens of recording devices. The tour guide Sophie moved forward instinctively to intervene, but palace security officers were already converging on the scene with practiced efficiency. For Whitmore, the moment stretched into an eternity of internal conflict that tested every principle he had built his life upon. The physical pain of the strike was negligible. He had endured far worse during his military service, had felt the sting of shrapnel and the burn of desert sun on open wounds. But the violation of his dignity, the public humiliation of being struck while unable to defend himself, triggered responses that went deeper than training could easily suppress. His military instincts screamed for immediate reaction, for the kind of decisive response that would neutralize a threat and reassert control. Yet even as these instincts surged, another part of his consciousness activated, the part shaped not just by military discipline, but by the deeper values instilled by his schoolteacher mother, who had spent 40 years demonstrating that the strongest response to aggression was not matching force with force, but meeting hate with something unexpected. Whitmore's hands, which had remained at precise regulation position throughout the assault, began to tremble almost imperceptibly. Not from fear or weakness, but from the enormous effort required to choose restraint over the natural human impulse toward retaliation. The blood continued its slow path down his face, each drop a visible reminder of the choice before him. Palace security protocols were clear. An assault on a member of the Queen's Guard constituted a serious criminal offense that would result in immediate arrest and prosecution. He needed only to maintain his position and allow the security apparatus to function as designed. Justice would be served through proper channels, and his dignity would be vindicated by the system created to protect those who served the crown. But as Whitmore's eyes finally moved from their fixed position to look directly at his assailant, he saw something that complicated the simple narrative of victim and aggressor. Ashford Kent's expression, which had shown triumphant contempt in the moment of striking, was already transforming into something more complex. Behind the defensive anger in her eyes, Whitmore recognized a pain he had seen before, in the faces of soldiers pushed beyond their breaking points, in civilians traumatized by violence, in people whose carefully constructed worlds had collapsed and left them grasping for any sense of control or power. His military experience in Afghanistan had taught him that aggression often masked deeper wounds, that the people who lashed out most violently were frequently those suffering most profoundly. He had watched skilled commanders diffuse potentially lethal situations not through overwhelming force, but through unexpected compassion, by responding to the hidden pain rather than the visible threat. These lessons, learned in life or death circumstances, had shaped his understanding of what true strength really meant. The crowd waited with bated breath for his response, their phones recording. Their assumptions about what would happen next, firmly established by countless action movies and social media videos where provocation met retaliation in satisfying displays of justice. They expected anger, expected the guard's composure to finally crack under this ultimate provocation, expected security to drag the woman away, while the wronged soldier stood vindicated by her punishment. What they witnessed instead would challenge everything they thought they understood about strength, dignity, and the power of choosing grace over vengeance. With movements as precise and controlled as his ceremonial duties required, Whitmore reached up with his white-gloved right hand and slowly wiped the blood from his cheek. The gesture was neither rushed nor dramatic, but carried the weight of deliberate choice made in the crucible of public humiliation. The white fabric of his glove stained crimson, creating a visual symbol that would be captured in hundreds of photographs and shared millions of times across social media platforms, a representation of dignity maintained despite violation, of purity preserved despite assault. When he finally spoke, his voice carried across the hushed courtyard with the same calm authority he had used to command soldiers under fire, but softened with something unexpected, genuine compassion for the woman who had just attacked him. "Ma'am," he began, his words measured and clear despite the pain radiating from his injured face. "I hope that whatever pain you're carrying inside finds healing. The anger you're showing me isn't really meant for me, is it? We all have battles others can't see." The words landed like physical blows, but of an entirely different kind than Ashford Kent had delivered. Her expression, which had begun to harden into defensive justification, cracked visibly as his unexpected response penetrated her armor of entitlement and rage. Tears began forming in her eyes, though whether from shame, shock, or the sudden recognition of her own pain being acknowledged by the man she had just assaulted. Even she couldn't have said, Whitmore continued, his voice never rising above conversational volume, yet carrying in the absolute silence that had fallen over the courtyard. "I've served 10 years protecting people, ma'am. Before this uniform, I wore another in Afghanistan, where I learned that hurt people hurt people. I've seen strong men break down from pain they couldn't express, and I've watched that pain turn outward toward whoever was nearest. I don't know what you're going through, but I recognize someone who's suffering." He paused, reaching into his uniform pocket and withdrawing a spotless handkerchief, extending it toward her with the same courtesy he might show a member of the royal family. "This uniform represents service, ma'am, not just to the crown, but to the principles of dignity, honor, and protection. That includes protecting people from their own worst moments when possible. I could have you arrested, and the law would support that decision completely. But I wonder if what you really need isn't punishment, but the kind of help I needed when I came back from war carrying pain I didn't know how to handle." The crowd, which had been recording with the eager anticipation of witnessing justice served, found themselves instead capturing something far more powerful and unexpected, a demonstration of grace under fire that transcended simple narratives of right and wrong. Many lowered their phones, too moved by what they were witnessing to maintain the distance of documentation. Several elderly tourists, veterans themselves by their bearing, stood with tears streaming down their faces, recognizing in Whitmore's response the kind of character that military service aimed to develop but rarely achieved. Ashford Kent stood trembling, her expensive designer suit and jewelry suddenly appearing as the costume they had always been, a facade covering vulnerability and pain. The handkerchief remained extended in Whitmore's steady hand, an offering of dignity to someone who had just stripped him of his own. When she finally reached out to accept it, her hand shook so violently that Whitmore gently pressed the fabric into her palm like a father comforting a child. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words barely audible but carrying the weight of genuine remorse that went beyond the immediate assault to encompass years of treating others as beneath her consideration. "I'm so sorry. You're right, I'm not angry at you. I'm angry at everything I can't control, and you were just there and silent. And you thought I wouldn't feel it because I'm trained not to show it," Whitmore finished for her. "But we all feel, ma'am. The uniform doesn't change that. It just teaches us to choose how we respond to what we feel. And right now, I'm choosing to respond to your pain rather than your action, because I believe people are more than their worst moments." Palace security had reached the scene by now, but their usual protocol of immediate intervention had been suspended by the unprecedented nature of what they were witnessing. The senior officer present, Commander Sarah Mitchell, a 25-year veteran of royal protection, made a decision that would later be scrutinized but ultimately vindicated. She allowed the situation to continue developing rather than imposing the standard response of arrest and removal. Whitmore turned slightly to address Commander Mitchell, blood still visible on his face, his uniform stained but his bearing uncompromised. "Commander, I'd like to decline pressing charges if that's permissible. I believe this was a moment of pain lashing out, not malicious intent. With your permission, I'd prefer to handle this as a moment of teaching rather than punishment." The request was so unusual, so contrary to protocol and precedent, that Mitchell later admitted she struggled to find appropriate response. But something in Whitmore's bearing, in the obvious sincerity of his compassion for his assailant, convinced her to support his decision. "Guardsman Whitmore, given the circumstances and your exemplary service record, I'll defer to your judgment on this matter. However, medical attention for your injuries is non-negotiable, and this incident will be thoroughly documented." As Whitmore was led away for medical treatment, he paused to address Ashford Kent one final time. "Ma'am, I hope you'll consider speaking with someone about what you're going through. Pain doesn't go away because we ignore it or transfer it to others. It has to be addressed directly. The Palace Chaplain offers counseling services that are available to anyone who needs them, regardless of their relationship to the royal household. And if that's not appropriate, I hope you'll find someone who can help you carry what you're dealing with." The videos of the incident spread across social media with the viral velocity that defines the modern age. But their trajectory followed an unusual pattern that revealed something profound about collective human hunger for examples of grace under pressure. Initial posts focused on the shocking moment of assault, generating predictable outrage and demands for justice. But as longer videos emerged showing Whitmore's complete response, the narrative transformed into something far more nuanced and powerful. Within 24 hours, the hashtag Grace Under Fire had been shared over 10 million times, with commentary from military veterans, psychologists, religious leaders, and ordinary people moved by witnessing an alternative to the revenge culture that dominated so much of modern discourse. Mental health advocates use the incident to discuss how untreated pain manifests as aggression, while military training experts pointed to Whitmore's response as exemplifying the highest ideals of service, protection, that extends even to those who cause harm. Ashford Kent, who could easily have disappeared into private shame, instead made a decision that would define the rest of her life. With Whitmore's permission and encouragement, she released a public statement that began with full acceptance of responsibility for her actions and evolved into a raw, honest discussion of the personal crisis that had led to her breakdown. She spoke of her divorce, the loss of identity that came from building a life entirely around another person, the way wealth had isolated her from genuine human connection, and the realization that causing harm to others had been her unconscious way of externalizing internal pain. More significantly, she announced the establishment of a charitable foundation focused on providing mental health support for people struggling with life transitions, divorce, loss, unemployment, or any of the countless crises that strip away identity and leave people flailing for stability. She committed not just her money but her time, speaking publicly about her own journey toward healing and the lessons learned. From the man she had assaulted about responding to pain with grace rather than aggression, the transformation wasn't immediate or perfect. Genuine change never is. Ashford Kent spent months in intensive therapy, working through decades of using wealth and status to avoid confronting her own vulnerabilities. But her foundation began providing free counseling services within 6 months, and its first year helped over 5,000 people navigate crises without resorting to the kind of destructive behavior she had demonstrated at the palace gates. Whitmore, for his part, refused all media interview requests and celebrity that his actions might have provided. He returned to his duties with the same quiet dedication that had always characterized his service. Though palace officials noted that his example had sparked conversations throughout the ranks about what true strength really meant, his response became required study in military leadership programs, not for its adherence to protocol, which it had technically violated, but for its demonstration of wisdom that transcended rules to address human need. The royal family itself took note of the incident, with several members privately commending Whitmore for his handling of an impossible situation. Queen Camilla, who had long advocated for mental health awareness, invited both Whitmore and Ashford Kent to a private reception honoring those who had contributed to changing public conversations about psychological well-being. The meeting between the two, 6 months after the assault, was described by witnesses as extraordinarily moving, with Ashford Kent thanking Whitmore not just for declining to prosecute but for seeing her humanity in a moment when she had displayed none herself. The broader impact of the incident extended far beyond the individuals directly involved. Tourist behavior at Buckingham Palace noticeably improved, with visitors demonstrating greater respect for the guards and their service. More significantly, the video of Whitmore's response became a teaching tool in conflict resolution programs, anger management courses, and discussions about responding to aggression with unexpected compassion rather than matching force with force. Perhaps most powerfully, the incident sparked global conversations about how society responds to people in crisis. Whitmore's instinctive recognition that Ashford Kent's aggression masked deeper pain, and his choice to address that pain rather than punish its expression, provided a template for thinking about human behavior more complexly than simple good and bad categorizations allowed. His response demonstrated that strength sometimes means absorbing a blow without returning it, that justice sometimes looks like mercy, and that the most powerful response to hate might be refusing to hate in return. In the end, what began as a moment of violence and humiliation transformed into an enduring example of how choosing grace over vengeance can create ripples of healing that extend far beyond the immediate situation. Whitmore's bloodied face and stained gloves became symbols not of victimhood, but of conscious choice. The choice to protect even those who harm us, to see beyond action to underlying pain, and to believe that people are capable of redemption when met with compassion rather than condemnation. The question isn't whether we'll face moments that test our character. Life guarantees those tests will come. The question is what we'll choose in those moments when every instinct screams for retaliation, when social pressure demands revenge, when the easy path is meeting aggression with greater aggression. Whitmore's choice reminds us that true strength often looks like restraint, that real courage sometimes means refusing to fight, and that the most powerful victories are sometimes won by those who choose not to strike back. What would you do if someone struck you in public, humiliated you, violated your dignity? Could you see past the action to the pain beneath? Could you choose grace when everything in you demanded justice? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that challenge us to become better versions of ourselves, one difficult choice at a time.